me preface what these are. So we have this description of what is the field and who is the knower of the field. And Krishna has said, essentially, in order to be able to do this subtle discrimination, we need to acquire some qualities of head and heart. It's another articulation of what we would call the qualifications of a fit student, being adhikari. All right, help us out here, Deepa.
Should I read the Sanskrit and English both, or do you just the English?
Just the English. We're in the middle of it.
Okay. Humility, unpretentiousness, non-injury, forgiveness, uprightness, service to the teacher, purity, steadfastness, self-control.
So I think we ended up last week with uprightness.
Yes.
Endeavoring to be a person of integrity, to grasp and develop a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. What's the next idea?
Service to the teacher.
Yes. So this does not mean when you find a guru and they say, I want you to wash my windows, give me $10,000 so my nephew can start a business, buy me a Rolls Royce. Nonsense. It is our custom in Indian culture to do seva, but you want to serve the tradition. There is a custom of what we call Guru Dakshina. So out of your generosity, not out of any obligation, if you wish to make a contribution so the teaching can move forward, fine. But that's not the deepest meaning of the shloka. When I was with Swamiji, I had friends who had other gurus. And their gurus would say, oh, you should do this, and you should marry so-and-so, and stuff like that. And after a camp, I would say, Swamiji, what do you want me to do? And he would go, I have no desires. I would be frustrated. And then I realized what he was telling me to do was discriminate between the real and the unreal, turn my attention toward the self, practice detachment and discrimination, etc. He was giving me instructions all the time. In fact, that's all he ever did, was tell me what to do. So real service to the teacher is to follow the suggestions as they're put forward in the scriptures. That's interesting. In Viveka Chudamani, Shankara says, without knowledge of the self, study of the scriptures is futile. Because you won't understand them. You'll make up your own interpretations. With knowledge of the scriptures, with knowledge of the self, study of the scriptures is again futile. Why do we have the scriptures? They serve as a bridge for the teacher to be able to communicate the vision of the infinite to the student. So the best service to the teacher is to strive hard for liberation. Everything else is pretty meaningless. Now, one of the first demonstrations to ourselves of our willingness to let go of ego is to try to follow the suggestions of the teacher. So if the teacher says, I'd like you to take up a practice of sitting in meditation for 20 minutes every day, and we don't do it, then we're not serving the teacher. We're not serving the tradition. If the teacher says, you know, you ought to be reading scripture all the time, go through a few shlokas of Gita or one of the works of Shankar or a Upanishad. That should be part of your morning God time, what we call swadhyaya, your own self-study. When you're out there in the world practicing vairagya, cool your jets, non-attachment. Any thoughts on this deeper understanding of service to the teacher? All right, next idea.
Purity.
Purity. So we want to look at this in two ways. Fang, can I ask a favor of you? Mm-hmm. Would you come poke that white box so I can see it? I keep there. I end up knocking myself offline. Purity. So when we think of purity, there's several ways we can do it. The exoteric understanding is ritual purity. This doesn't have a lot of meaning for Westerners, but for Indians, for example, if you're a Brahmin, you're not supposed to touch a dead body. You're not supposed to clean toilets. You're not supposed to eat food that isn't cooked by another Brahmin, etc. This is ritual purity. Jews, by the way, have a lot of the same kinds of ritual purity. This is not at all what we're really talking about. What kind of purity are we talking about? First of all, just the way you live your life. A place to start. As a rule, mind-altering substances, drugs and alcohol, are antithetical to the spiritual life. It was big back in the 60s, 70s. It's now come back. People are not doing ayahuasca to see God. I'm not a moralist. If once a year you want to do ecstasy and go to Burning Man, knock yourself out. But if you think you're going to find God by taking a drug, you are a fool. You are a fool. What it is a double samsara. When you take a drug, the drug tells you that what you're seeing on the drug is real. More real than this world. Oh, I do ecstasy. Oh, I love everybody. Oh. You think that's real. So it's an illusion about this world, which is an illusion about ultimate reality. A double samsara. So that's the first kind of purity. Now, if you're out to dinner with a bunch of friends, and you do this maybe once a month or so, you have a glass of wine with dinner, it's not a big deal, by and large. Keep your mind clear so you can see what's going on. In terms of your diet, you will find, by and large, if you eat a lighter diet rather than heavier foods, you'll find that the quality of your meditation will improve. Ramana Maharshi was once asked by a student, how do I achieve a sattvic mind, a pure mind? Bhagwan's answer was, eat sattvic food. Many of us become vegetarians. The Dalai Lama eats meat. Nothing necessarily special. But if you find that lightening your diet is something you're drawn to, fresh fruits and vegetables, it's a pure diet. You know, McDonald's and fries is probably not a great diet for a yogi. Then purity of speech. Refraining from gossip, trash talking. Cleanliness, saucha, it's kind of purity. Keep your house ordered. If any of you are slobs and you know there's a lot of clutter and dirty dishes and things piled around your house, then you clean it up. Have you ever noticed how, you feel better, your mind is more sattvic? Who's had that experience? If you live in shared housing, it may be more difficult because you may have sloth levels that are different than your roommates. But this is the idea of purity in the outer for a yogi. And at the deepest level, second to the deepest nirvana, purity of mind. This doesn't mean so much that we have good thoughts as opposed to bad thoughts. It means we have fewer. Ultimately, when you see that the self is already pure, that's the highest purity. Any questions on this? Next idea.
Steadfastness.
Yes, steadfastness. Many of us start the path because of a human crisis. We have a tragedy in our lives, a parent or a loved one dies. We have a severe illness, lose a fortune or something like that, financial catastrophe. But if that's the only motivation in time as our life starts to work better, we lose our steadfastness on the path. I tell people, I've been a crappy yogi, but I've been steadfast. Keep on keeping on. Don't get discouraged. Inspiration will let us down. Oh, I didn't feel like meditating this morning. Well, we meditate because that's our rule. That's our practice. That's our abhyasa. Any thoughts on this? Steadfastness. Nisargadatta Maharaj used the term being earnest, just keeping on it. Next idea.
Self-control.
Yes. So we have these two voices that scream in our ears, raga and vesha. I must have it this way, and I will never put up with that. Don't you know who I am? These need to be silenced. Back in the second chapter, Krishna talked about attaining to yoga, yoga rudha, where we have this willingness to accept life on life's terms. We're willing for it to be how it is, with what we have or without what we have. Absolutely independent of the phenomenon. Keeping the mind still. Next idea.
That's the end of the 8th shloka.
All right, next verse.
Okay, let me bring it up. Indriyartheshu vairagya manahamkara evacha janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanu darshanam. Indifference to the objects of the senses, and also absence of egoism, perception of or reflection upon evils in birth, death, and old age, sickness, and pain.
So he continues with a list. Here's another one. The first idea.
Indifference to the objects of the senses.
Yes. So I'll give you a secret. All of yoga fundamentally reduces itself to two things: abhyasa and vairagya. Practice and letting go. What is vairagya? That desire, meaning we don't achieve it overnight. To give up attachment to all enjoyments gained through the senses, and the desire to give up an identification with any form of self, from the body up to something, the form of Brahma, Shankara says, meaning I'm a powerful, important person. So we develop this indifference. Now, this is a very, very subtle practice because it sounds like suppression. Suppression in yoga doesn't work. Back in, I think it's the 4th chapter, he says, the person who gets rid of the objects of desire but lets the desire remain behind is verily a hypocrite. But their desire leaves them on seeing the Supreme. So the ruthless rule of the mind is the mind will pursue the experience that's given it the greatest joy. Can't help it. This is why, for example, people who do crystal meth and hook it up with sex have such a problem letting go of it because it's so euphoric. Thank God the self is the most beloved, or we'd all be in a mess. So with this understanding of the ruthless rule of the mind, I like to share an example. Did you have a little tricycle when you were a child? You loved your little tricycle. pedaled around on it. Then as you got older, perhaps your parents got you a two-wheeled bike. You learned to ride the bike. You were zipping around all over the neighborhood. What happened to your attachment, your desire for the tricycle once you got the bike?
Went to zero.
Was there any great heroic act of renunciation to give up the tricycle? So the key to indifference to the world is to give the mind something more rewarding. This is why a meditative practice is so essential. In the end, we'll find that the world itself is not bad. Worldly enjoyments actually don't exist. There is no such thing as worldly enjoyment. There's only the joy of the self. There's a mediated way of experiencing it. When desire and object of desire become one, what I'm getting is a moment freed from jonesing, a moment freed from longing. When I get what I want, I don't want it anymore. I have it. What actually happens is a taste of the bliss of my own self-nature. I use the object to induce that state. But if I'm in the state of ignorance, I attribute the happiness to the person, the place, the thing, or the situation. Then I develop an attachment. So the yogi needs to watch her mind. Notice what it feels like when you want something you don't have. It sucks. It's painful. And the more you want it, further away it is, the more it hurts. And own your own ananda. When you get what you want, pay attention to what happens to your mind. The more completely the object satisfied my desire, bang, before my mind stops. We also need to meditate, because in time, as we can let go of the monkey mind, we begin to have a non-mediated experience of the bliss of myself. And also, we let go of the world through a steady observation of its defects. What upset you today or this week? Anything? Is this the first time you felt this way? Isn't your suffering repetitive and boring? Aren't you tired of it? Let it go. Quit trying to wrestle the world into behaving. Or as Yoga Vasishta says, why try to cover the world in leather when you can wear shoes? So the indifference to the world comes first through insight, through a steady observation of the inherent defects, the fundamentally temporary, impermanent nature of everything. And to see that it's the longing itself that's painful. and that it's myself that is the source, the fountainhead. So this is how we develop indifference to worldly objects, not through some sort of moral position. Oh, I was taught as a child, I come from a Brahmin family, we're not supposed to like nice things. I've done more. There's no virtue in poverty. There's virtue in simplicity, because it just makes life simpler. But you do it because it's intelligent, not because you get a gold star. Any thoughts on this? Next one.
Unpretentiousness.
So ego has two positions that it wants to attract itself to. Either I'm just a little more important, just a little better than everybody else, or ego's other form of pride. Nobody is as messed up as I am. I have more trauma. I have more abuse. I have had a worse family of origin. I'm an immigrant. I'm a this, I'm a that. I have this disability. Better than, worse than. It's where ego is always place that ego doesn't like to live is the truth, which is you're a pretty ordinary person. Your mind is just like everybody else's. So, humility, unpretentiousness is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. The truly humble person isn't dealing with call it the shit fairy that sits on our shoulder. How am I doing? Am I okay? What do they think of me? But watch how your mind positions ego. Do you think always I'm trying to be a little better than everybody? Or do I think I'm a little worse than everybody? Both of those are forms of pride. Must have an identity as a person. Endeavor to see that you're a worker among workers. You are smack dab part of the human condition. Any thoughts on this? This has nothing to do, by the way, with not striving for excellence in your work. But where you get in trouble is if I'm doing it better than the next person. No. Am I better at my work than I was yesterday? That's how you want to measure. Next idea.
Sorry, Jim, I read unpretentiousness from verse 8. It was in the previous shloka, so my apologies. But thank you.
Well, we could do it again.
Yeah. I'll go back to 9 now. Also, absence of egoism.
Yes, so take on the slogan, the maxim, the position. If I feel like a person, I'm deluded. good person, bad person, indifferent person. So this is our discrimination between the subtlest thing, the idea of self. I'm a person, and who I really am. I'm that ground of being, the knower of the field, the witnessing consciousness. Now, one of the things we have to be careful about is ego will try to own the path itself. Jim, I think I am becoming a better yogi. I have had this experience in my meditation, and I have let go of this, and I'm accomplishing that, and I'm having this experience. Do you see that that's all I, me, mine, I, me, mine, I, me, mine? Still. So Ramana Maharshi's powerful meditation. Koham, or in Tamil, Namyar. Who am I? So whatever comes into my field of experience, a sensation, feeling, or a thought, to whom did this occur? To me. Who am I? And have this radical reversal of the attentive faculty. Keep focusing the attention on pure I. What happens when you go looking for I? Ego falls, and all that's there is Chidakash, the space of consciousness itself. Next idea.
Perception of or reflection upon evils in birth, death, old age, sickness, and pain.
So the root desire is, may I live, may I never cease to be. Identification with the body. So we need to see the inherent dosha, defect of identification with the body. Now, let me give you a key to how we can deal with this. Most of the time I run around in this world and I'm seeking all the stuff that I think is going to make me happy. I don't want to get old. I don't want to lose my faculties. I want to stay young and pretty. But in deep sleep, everybody enjoys deep sleep. What condition is causing the deep peace of deep sleep? It is the absence of the mind, the absence of body identification. Isn't that interesting? You need to have a mind, you need to have body identification in order to suffer. You do not need it in order to be blissful. So, in the tradition, moksha, liberation, is not immortality of the personality. It is freedom from the rat race of birth. Any thoughts on this? Next idea.
That's the end of Shloka 9.
Shloka 10.
Let me bring it up on my screen just a second. Asaktirnabhishvanga putradara grihadishu nityam cha samachittatva mishtanishtopapatishu. Non-attachment, non-identification of self with son, wife, home, and the rest, and constant even-mindedness on the attainment of the desirable and the undesirable.
So again, he's continuing these qualities of head and heart that we're invited to acquire. What was the first one again?
Non-attachment.
Yes. So there are all sorts of layers for this one. The first is I have given up. I have this vairagya, this I'm letting go of my obsession with people, places, things, conditions. But the deeper understanding of it is, I am not attached or identified with the body, with the mind, with the intellect. I've seen through the sham of the perceiver, feeler, thinker entity. Asangoham, 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 puna puna, Satchidananda rupoham, aham evaham avyaya. Unattached, unattached, unattached am I. Again and again. Don't do it just once. We have to keep doing it till we're rooted. My nature is existence, consciousness, this absolute. I am that I am, immutable. So we detach from any personal sense of self. It's the highest non-attachment. Next idea.
Non-identification of self with son, wife, home, and the rest.
Yes. So these are a catch-all for the kinds of things that cause us to get identified. They all, by the way, have to do with the body. So I am the parent of my children. Most of us, I don't think any of you have kids, do you? No. But, I am the partner of my husband or wife. I am the child of my parents. I have my job. I have my ethnic identity. All of that. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. And even the subtler forms, like the narrative that we get from our family of origin. Oh, my father did blah, 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 blah. I am a victim of that. I have this particular malady. That is. Be empty. Any thoughts on this?
Jim, I have a question.
Yes.
Well, I have asked this question before. So the difficulty that I have is in practicing some of these ideas. Like when you said about asangoham, letting go of our attachments to people, things, and such. So how, I mean, even though one might understand that at least at some level that this is false or impermanent, I find it difficult to practice this. So I had a reminder of that this week when it's about a student of mine. So I don't have children, but I have students, and a student of mine, she got some fairly unfair reviews, and she was really upset about it. So at in life situations like this, I'm finding it difficult to practice the teaching.
So where do you think your identification is?
Body and mind, I guess.
Well, did you give her the bad review?
No.
Do you think it's your job to fix it?
Well, I mean, I'm powerless to do anything.
Exactly. Now, is feeling miserable going to help her review?
No.
Yeah. Think. Now, so you feel bad for her. I'm glad you're a sympathetic and an empathetic person. So you have genuine sorrow at her misfortune. But are you not aware of those feelings?
Yes.
So you are not the feelings, you're the knower of the feelings.
Yes.
Now, listen carefully. We're not saying that by practicing this detachment, that it's a tool to fix my painful feelings. I never said that. But I will say this. Any psychic event, anything in our interior life that is fully experienced tends to dissipate. Any psychic event that we deny, we run from it, or suppress, will tend to persist. So in your meditation, let the sorrow about this person's review come up. It's a tragedy. And you maintain the understanding. I am not the sorrow, I'm the knower of the sorrow. It's not you. Now, then you look, be solution oriented. Is feeling miserable going to help the student in any way? Probably not. If the reviews were just, take the time to say, okay, on this paper, this is what you might have done better. On this test, this is, you're an academic. You know what I mean? If it was academic politics, which frankly too often it can be, did she anger a professor? I don't know. But look for solutions rather than just feeling bad. Now, most of the time, I think it can be traced back to our fundamental discomfort in the presence of the suffering of others. We want them to stop. It's like the screaming baby. We can't stand it. So it's our problem because I want to get away from their suffering. But that's different than real empathy, real compassion. And if you watch, you'll begin to untangle it. You'll begin to untangle it. You'll find out what's really there in your own yoga. Now, if you're a mentor to this, it's a woman student or a man?
It's a woman student.
Yeah. Well, perhaps you can be helpful.
Yeah, I'm doing my best. What I run into is that my own non-acceptance of these situations comes in the way.
Acceptance means the acknowledgement of a material fact. It never means we have to like it. Many people confuse acceptance with liking it. The acknowledgement of a material fact is the dictionary definition of acceptance. Is she a grad student or an undergrad?
A grad student.
Yeah, so it can be pretty important. So be solution oriented. She wouldn't be the first person who, got her dissertation topic or subject, rejected, defended a thesis and somebody didn't like it. And the games academics play. But if you want to take an action, wringing our hands doesn't help. Be solution oriented. And you may not be able to do anything about it except love her. I don't know.
Yes, I do that.
Yeah. But we can love people without making it about ourselves. I'm so unhappy because you have this problem. Oh, it's all about me and my sorrow about your problem. That's not about them. That's not service.
Sure.
You see the difference?
Yeah.
Guess how I know about this?
Because you were also in the...
Well, I am very, very familiar with that character defect, that klesha. So I understand. But detachment doesn't mean that we, aren't caring about other people. Okay, here's something that popped into my mind. I don't know if it's so in India, but at least in the US, there is a professional standard. Why don't we wait till after class to go for the chocolates, please? That a physician doesn't operate on, a surgeon doesn't operate on a member of their own family. They're too emotionally involved. They don't have the objective ability to be able to do the surgery. Do you understand what I mean, Shweta?
Yes.
So you need to think like the surgeon when you're with her, not like the mother.
Yeah, I stumble with this quite a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jim.
All right. Next idea.
Jim, can I ask you something?
Please.
This is to build on Shweta's question. So what does one do about feelings like grief, which, intellectually you can internalize that you should detach from it, and you know that you're not suffering, and you cultivate the detachment, but still grief can be a very heavy sack of feelings to carry around, especially when you lose someone to death, for example, right?
Well,
What's like, in Shweta's case, for example, it recommended, she loved the student. When there's no externality and it's your internal self that is the student, then how do we address even the part that we are detached from?
so what do you do when someone dies? I have a student who's been coming. She lost her husband to COVID about 8 months ago. She's visiting here from India, and she is so courageous. 42 years of marriage, and she lost her husband. And she wants to study second chapter of Gita. Now that's courage, because the teaching of Gita starts essentially with the 11th verse in the second chapter, which says, you grieve for whom you should not grieve, though you speak words of wisdom. You understand the 7, stages of grief. The wise grieve neither for the living nor the dead. And that's hard teaching. And then what do? I don't get it, Krishna. How can you be so heartless? And then go back to second chapter and look at how he moves through it. I promise you, if you will continue on this journey, the people who are most dear to you can die, and it can be a beautiful experience. Because in the end, nobody dies. Even the subtle body doesn't die. But as long as you're identified with your own body, and you're identified that that person is the other body, of course you're going to grieve. But I don't want to go, we have a whole chapter that we deal with that, the second chapter. But you have a copy of Gita, go back and start with the 11th verse and read what Krishna says, and read Swamiji's commentary. That's all I can recommend at this point.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Next idea.
Constant even-mindedness on the attainment of the desirable and undesirable.
Yes. So what we call this samadrishta, this equality of vision. So I kind of like to think of life as a sine wave. And, we get our successes, we get our failures, we get our joys, we get our sorrows, we get our wins, we get our losses. That is life. The spiritual life is not about hitting all the green lights of life. That's romanticism. We want to step back and cultivate a peace that's beyond this world. The Master Jesus said it so beautifully. My kingdom is not of this world. Be in the world, but not of it. Have a peace that passes all understanding, that's not dependent on the successes and failures, the gains and loss of this world. ultimately we begin to see the fundamentally illusory, empty nature of the forms. It's all Brahman. Next idea.
That's the end of the shloka, Jim.
All right. Next one.
Shloka 11. Mayi chananya yogena bhaktiravya bhicharini vivikta desha se vitma maratirjanna samsadi. Unswerving devotion unto me by the yoga of non-separation, resorting to solitary places, distaste for the society of men.
All right. So again, there are layers in this one. The first idea,
Unswerving devotion unto me by the yoga of non-separation.
so what does yoga mean? Comes from the root yuj, which means to yoke or to join. We get the English word yoke from it. It is the yoking of the mind to the infinite. Doesn't mean Krishna out there. First, we need to realize my self nature. Then we need to revel in that, retiring to the self. We're not there yet in our yoga, constantly thinking about it. Making everything in my life yoga. So in the beginning, we think the spiritual life is a way to manage and do better at my worldly life. I do my Vedanta class in between Pilates and Reiki therapy. But at some point, the whole thing shifts upside down. We see the goal of the human life is God consciousness. Where in this human mind, I have the realization that it's myself. It's always with me. It's the source of all this. Then everything in the world becomes, as Ram Dass says, grist for the mill. Go outside, supposed to catch the 11:10 bus and it doesn't come. Okay, I get to practice letting go. I get to practice patience. Right here is the totality of Brahman. I applied for a job, I had my heart set on it, I didn't get it, right? It's an opportunity to let go. Something more appropriate will come along. Then everything in life becomes useful for our yoga. Next idea.
Resorting to solitary places.
So there is value in having solitude in your life. Some of us are so extroverted that we are just profoundly uncomfortable being alone. I like to jokingly say we don't have friends, we take hostages. We have to have the company of people. The yogi has to come to a point where they're at peace being by themselves. Everything I need is within me. Now, I'm not saying that there's virtue in isolation. There are some of us who are a little bit wackadoodle. We think the solution to loneliness is isolation. Usually it's because we have a fear of social interaction. We're uncomfortable. We feel awkward with social interaction. That's another issue we need to solve. But the one big issue here is to be able to be comfortable being by ourselves. Then we can do our meditation. Then we can do our self-study. We can set aside sacred time when we're not compulsively extroverted. Any thoughts on this? Next idea.
Distaste for the society of men.
He's kind of riffing on the same thing. Again, those of us who have to be out there. What's the phrase the kids use? FOMO, is that right?
Okay.
Fear of missing out. Gotta be here, gotta be there, that concert, going to this. Always this fear of missing out. We need to let that go. It doesn't mean we don't have a social life. It's not saying that. Yet the lakshanam, the implied, the inferred meaning. It's very different than always needing to be where the action is, which many of us have. Next idea.
That's the end of the shloka, Jim.
All right, next one.
Okay.
I'm going faster. See, Deepa?
I'm sorry.
I'm pulling your leg.
Adhyatma jnana nityatvam tattva jnanartha darshanam etaj jnanamiti proktam jnanam yadota anyatha. Constancy in self-knowledge, perception of the end of true knowledge. This is declared to be knowledge, and what is opposed to it is ignorance.
So this is the intelligent way to live. And what is opposed to it is an ignorant way to live. So the last two major ideas, the first one was it constancy and self-knowledge.
Yes.
So this again, we can take in two different ways. The yogi wants to have an awareness of their own internal psychology. You can do this through therapy, you can do this through journaling, you can do this if you're in a 12-step group doing inventories, but we want to let go of an unconscious life. So you want to be able to pay attention. Do you need to leave, sweetheart?
Yes.
You need to be able to be aware of what's going on. No mind. So we are not in denial about our kleshas, our afflictions, our doshas, our defects. And the most important maxim I can give you, if I am disturbed, no matter the cause, I'm the one with the dosha, the defect. There's something wrong with me. So when people come to me and they say, well, my partner, they did this and they did that and they did this and they did that. I'm trying to get them to do this and I want them to do that. No chance of any freedom. What's my part? Where am I attached? Where am I identified? Any thoughts on that? Now, it's a truth that the world and its people are oftentimes quite screwed up and quite wrong. But if I'm upset, I'm the one with the problem. So that's the lower form of self-knowledge. Constancy and self-knowledge. Higher form is I live from the place I am the witness. I am Chidakash, the space of consciousness. I'm not the body, not the mind, not the ego. And what was the second idea?
Perception of the end of true knowledge.
Yes. The end of true knowledge is realization of yourself. So I don't get confused about what the goal of life is. And I'm a mumukshu. I strive hard. So this whole list is considered knowledge. It's antithetical to ignorance. We'll stop here and pick it up next week. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Om Tat Sat. Now, how to do your self-study with this section. We can't practice all of them all at once. So what you can do is take one of these verses, maybe cut it into like 2 or 3 of the practices, maybe only one of the practices, and set that as your practice for the day. Tomorrow, pick another one. But that's the difference between just reading it and understanding it, and then endeavoring to make it a part of our daily practice. All right, thank you all.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. Good night.